Thank you so much for having me. Like Father Dean said, my name is Jennifer Fulwiler, and it's so great to be here. This is actually kind of a relaxing evening for me. I have 5 kids. My oldest is 6. My youngest is 4 weeks old. So this is kind of a nice evening for me to just relax and hang out, and it's a lot more calm than what I'd be doing at home. My oldest is a boy, and I have 4 girls on down from there. And it occurred to me the other day that we are going to have 4 teenage girls in the house at once. So start praying for me now. You might have just enough time to get all the prayers in. But not only am I excited to be here because it's a rare chance for me to say a full sentence without getting interrupted, but I'm so excited to share my story. Not because I'm so amazing or there's anything extraordinary about my life, but because it's a story of hope, of the proof that there is nobody who is beyond God's reach. It's a story of conversion. And of course, we as Catholics know that conversion is a process that never ends, that even if you've been a faithful Catholic for 30 years, you should always be seeking deeper conversion. And so I hope by sharing my story of conversion that you might take away something that you can apply to your own life. And it's just a story of somebody who was called out of ignorance and arrogance and cluelessness and into the light of Christ. And I hope that it gives you some inspiration for your own life. And maybe if you know people who have fallen away from faith, I hope that you find something tonight that you can take away with you. So atheism for me was not a phase. I think I was born an atheist. People talk about, that scientists have discovered that there's some sort of belief gene they think that helps people believe in God, and I didn't get the gene. I remember being, 4 years old, 5 years old, and the atheist worldview just made so much sense to me. I would look around and I would only believe in what I could see and what I could touch and observe. And of course I had little friends, who would talk about God and Jesus. And I always wondered how they could believe that, because he wasn't here. We couldn't see him. And they would talk about prayers, but I didn't really see their prayers getting answered in any particular way. And it was just baffling to me, even as a child. I was sort of a materialist fundamentalist, I think you could call it, where I refused to believe in anything that could not be proven through the scientific method. And I inherited this from my dad, who might be here tonight, so I want to make sure I get his story right. He was a non-believer. He doesn't like the term atheist, I think because in his day, being an atheist meant that you spent all your free time hating God and kicking puppies or something. So he gets a little nervous when I use that term. But basically, he had just kind of gone on his own journey, looking for evidence, asking tough questions, and he just came down on the side that said the evidence is not there for belief in God. And so that's just not what he believed. And that's something that he and I really bonded on, given my natural temperament. And, while my other little friends in elementary school were reading Nancy Drew and stuff like that, we'd curl up with Carl Sagan and, Cosmos and talk about astrophysics. And so I had a very sort of rational childhood. And I got a lot of great training from my dad, a very rigorous intellectual training of question assumptions. Don't believe something just because it feels good. Ask the tough questions. And ironically, that's what would end up leading me to Catholicism. My mom was not an atheist. She was what philosophers call a Macyist. And that is somebody who is much more concerned with whether Macy's has an additional 30% off this weekend than whether the monotheistic religions are correct that there is an omnipotent deity. It was really from my dad that I got this sort of very rational scientific method viewpoint. And as I got older, I grew in my faith or lack thereof. And I was an absolutely through and through militant atheist by the time I went to college. And I started out at Texas A&M. Do we have any Aggies in the house? And I loved it. I came from an Aggie family. My dad once joked that I could go to school wherever I wanted, but the money for my education was going to Texas A&M. And having that background, I loved, bonfire and all the traditions, but I could not get past the religiosity of it. I was so baffled at that point by belief that I would walk around campus and see these people in their Jesus t-shirts and all these otherwise intelligent people who seemed to believe in God, and it was so baffling to me. It was like witnessing widespread madness. And so I transferred to UT so I could hang out with a bunch of atheists, and that worked out well at the time. So after college, I started working at a high-tech company. And this, as an aside, this was back in like 1999 during the high-tech boom, where we had like a 26-year-old CEO, and every time we hit any milestone like finishing a work day, there would be a $20,000 party, with an open bar. And I looked around starry-eyed like, it's just nice to know what the real world is like. So that didn't last too long. But I did meet a very interesting coworker there named Joe, and we started dating, and we absolutely clicked. He was just the most amazing person I'd ever met. And then I found out that he believed in God. And if I'd known that ahead of time, we probably wouldn't have started dating, because my requirements for anyone I would date were that they had to have a sense of humor, admit that Office Space is the best movie ever created, and they could not believe in God. But I didn't find this out until a few months into the relationship, and so, I was stuck. And the thing you have to understand about Joe is he has a very interesting background. He grew up very poor. He was raised by a single mother who they had such hard times that she often couldn't even run the heat in the winter. And just out of sheer, bootstrapping drive to succeed, he ended up going to Yale, graduating in 3 years with honors, going to Columbia Law School and Stanford Business School. And, so there was no question that he was extremely intelligent, and yet he believed in God. And I would go to these events with him and meet these friends of his, they were like MD, PhDs from Harvard, Princeton. These people put my intelligence to shame, and yet some of them also believed in God. And this was really the first step in my conversion. It's not that I thought that they were right. I didn't. But for so long, I'd lived in this atheist bubble where I just didn't really know any people at that point who weren't atheists. And that's always kind of a dangerous way to live, because it lets you develop stereotypes about people who are on the outside. And so I had the stereotype that atheism was for the intelligentsia. Smart people are atheists, and then then there's everybody else who have all these religions and stuff. And looking back, it's embarrassing to admit that. That's such a ridiculous point of view, but that's how isolated I had become from sort of the real world. And so Joe and his friends just planted the seed. It made me let go of that idea that faith is inherently irrational, because these were some of the most intelligent, educated, rational people I had ever met, and yet they had a deep faith. And so I was too busy, though, traveling and having a social life to think too much about that. Joe and I got married in 2003 in a completely secular ceremony. We had a friend kind of stand in, act as more of an MC than an officiant. I wore a dark purple dress, which caused some of my country relatives to make comments like, "Where's the bride?" when I was walking down the aisle. We also learned a little lesson of, if you're going to reinvent the wheel on a 2,000-year-old tradition, you might want to rehearse it first. Because we wrote our own vows, because I was not going to accept these Judeo-Christian traditions because I questioned assumptions. So we did our own ceremony, wrote our own vows. We had people fly in from all over the world, not my friends, but Joe has friends from all over the world, and get dressed to the nines. They all show up. Because we didn't rehearse the vows, it turned out the ceremony was only 7 minutes. So people came all this way. We were kind of up there for a minute, and then we just left, and it was really awkward. And so that was our wedding, and it definitely established that we were not particularly religious people to our friends. And about a year after that, our first child was born, my son, and that is when my conversion really took off, and that's when atheism pretty much ended for me. Because what happened was, I had this this little 2-week-old baby. He was so cute, you know, with his little dark hair, and so amazing to me. I hadn't grown up around children. I'd only held a baby maybe one other time in my life, and so I was so amazed by this. And I looked at him, and I did what I was trained to do. You know, I had this very intellectual upbringing where it was very emphasized, you own your beliefs, you question assumptions. You don't, you know, say, oh, I believe this over here, and then kind of discard it when it gets inconvenient. So I was sitting there looking at, you know, my 2 or 3 week old son, and I said, okay, what is he in the purely atheist, materialist worldview? And because I'd had all these, like, oh, he's so special and I love him so much. And I'd say, okay, let's be intellectually honest here. Let's pause. Is he special? Well, he is a randomly evolved series of chemical reactions that will one day cease. And, oh, I love him. Like, well, scientists have proven that love is just, it's a chemical reaction that goes on in your brain. So all that I was experiencing there was just this chemical reaction. There was nothing transcendent about it. That, you know, if he and I were both to die the next day, none of this would last. It would, because it's all confined to our brains. There's nothing transcendent. I thought back to when I was in college, a pretty well-known atheist professor had made the statement that it is less ethical to kill an adult pig than a newborn baby because adult pigs are more intelligent. And of course, everyone recoiled at that. Oh, crazy man, shut him up. He's making atheists look bad. But I thought about that and thought, you know, that is, from the purely atheist materialist worldview, that is how you determine value. When somebody would ask us, you know, why is a human being more valuable than a gnat? Well, we'd say, well, because human beings have greater cognitive complexity and we are more intelligent, and, you know, therefore it's our complexity that's how you know we're more valuable. I sat there looking at my baby and realized he has less cognitive complexity at this point than an adult pig. So am I going to own that he's less valuable than a pig? And that is the point where I really rejected atheism. I said, this is not true. That the love that I feel for my son, it is real and it is transcendent. And even if the whole world blew up tomorrow, something about it would last. It's more than just the chemical reactions in our brains. In fact, it's the most real thing that I know. And that's when I really saw the intellectual dishonesty of atheism. That on the one hand, we would say, I only believe in things for which there are evidence, that you can know all through the scientific method. But then on the other hand, we would talk about, you know, honor and valor and love, and we were always appealing to transcendent concepts. We were never talking about the blips on an MRI when we would talk about that. And I realized you don't get it both ways. The famous atheist Bertrand Russell, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that first name right, but he once wrote, that man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collections of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve individual life beyond the grave, that all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction, that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built.